Most of us pour cereal without looking at the box twice. It's the one grocery item that runs on autopilot. Same shelf, same brand, decade after decade, because somewhere along the way we decided it was the safe option. And for a lot of these boxes, that trust was earned. Some cereals genuinely are what they claim to be. But a good chunk of what's sitting in Australian pantries right now is built less around actual nutrition and more around ticking the exact boxes that let a company print a health claim on the front of the pack. There's a system in place that's meant to protect you from that. It's called the Health Star rating, and part of what we're getting into today is how that system can be worked around legally by people who understand it better than you do. Part of why this particular product category gets away with so much is habit itself. Breakfast is rarely a decision. It's a reflex, made half asleep, usually by whoever's fastest to the pantry. Grocery researchers have long noted that repeat purchase categories like cereal see far less label checking than one-off purchases, simply because the decision was made years ago and never gets revisited. Nobody stands in the cereal aisle doing a slow comparison of 5 boxes the way they might when buying a new appliance. You grab the one you always grab. That's exactly the condition a misleading front-of-pack claim needs to survive. Not to fool you once, but to never be questioned again. So here's the plan. 9 specific patterns showing up on Australian cereal boxes right now, ranked from the ones that are a bit sneaky to the one that's genuinely the worst combination of tricks on the shelf. After that, 3 real alternatives you can actually buy this week, and 1 rule you can carry into any supermarket for the rest of your life. Let's start with the one almost every Australian household has bought at least once. Before we get into specific boxes, it's worth being clear about what actually makes a cereal a problem, because it's not just how much sugar is in it. There are 4 things worth checking where sugar sits on the ingredient list. The ratio between sugar and fiber, how heavily processed the ingredient list. The ratio between sugar and fiber, how heavily processed the ingredients are, and whether the claims on the front match what's really going on in the nutrition panel. Food scientists use a classification system called NOVA to sort products by how processed they are. And a lot of cereals that look wholesome land in the same ultra-processed bracket as soft drink and packaged snacks, not because of one bad ingredient, but because of how the whole thing is manufactured. Keep that in the back of your mind because it's going to come up again. The list moves from the milder offenders to the worst one. So the further we get, the more the tricks start stacking on top of each other. One more thing worth setting up before we start. None of these tricks require breaking any law. Food labelling in Australia is genuinely regulated. The Health Star rating, fibre claims, and whole grain claims all sit inside real government frameworks with real thresholds behind them. What's being exploited isn't the law itself. It's the gap between technically compliant and actually good for you. A company doesn't need to lie to end up with a misleading-looking box. It just needs to choose, very deliberately, which true things to print in large letters on the front and which true things to leave in 6-point font on the back. First up, the one that gets poured into lunchboxes because parents assume it's the safe choice. This is the Hula Grain Trust Play. Made with Hula grain is a genuinely true statement on a lot of boxes, and Hula grain oats or wheat are a real source of fiber and slower digesting carbohydrate. The problem is that the claim only refers to one ingredient, not the whole formulation. A cereal can be built around Hula grain and still carry a serious amount of added sugar, because nothing in Australian food law says a Hula grain claim has to come with a sugar limit. The front of the box tells you about one ingredient. The nutrition panel on the back tells you about the whole product, and those 2 stories don't always match. It's a mild case, honestly. Nobody's being deceived outright, they're just being shown the flattering half of the picture. That one's mild compared to what's marketed directly at kids. This next pattern relies on nostalgia rather than nutrition science. Cartoon mascot cereals work because they were built for children in the first place, and public health researchers in Australia have looked specifically at how cereal packaging uses bright characters and games to catch a child's attention in the supermarket aisle, independent of what's actually in the box. The trick isn't really aimed at you as an adult, it's aimed at the version of you that grew up eating it, and the version of your own kids that's standing next to the trolley right now. Once a product becomes part of childhood memory, adults tend to stop reading the label altogether because the decision was made emotionally a long time before you ever became a parent yourself. That's not a knock on nostalgia. It's just worth noticing that nostalgia is doing a job the ingredient list should be doing instead. There's also a generational handoff happening that rarely gets talked about. A parent who grew up trusting a particular box based on how it made them feel rather than what was in it tends to pass that same unexamined trust down to their own kid's breakfast without ever running it through today's eyes. The brand doesn't need to convince you fresh each time. It just needs the memory to stay warm enough that the label never gets a second look. Now here's one that hides behind a health claim most people never actually check. This is the source of fiber loophole. In Australia, a product can only legally use the phrase source of fiber if it contains at least 4 grams of dietary fiber per serving under the Food Standards Code that FSANZ enforces. That's a real, verifiable threshold, and plenty of cereals meet it honestly. But meeting a fiber threshold says nothing about the sugar sitting right next to that fiber in the same bowl. A product can be a completely legitimate source of fiber and still carry more added sugar per serve than a lot of people would guess, because the fiber claim and the sugar content are assessed by completely separate rules. The claim is true, it's just not the whole story, and it's printed a lot bigger than the numbers that would complicate it. This next one has the best health star rating on this entire list, which is exactly the problem. If you've ever looked at a 5-star box and assumed that settled the matter, this is the moment that might change how you read that number. The health star rating algorithm doesn't just look at sugar and salt. It also gives points for added vitamins and minerals, protein, and fiber, and those points can offset a genuinely high sugar count. Researchers looking at the system, including work out of Deakin University's Public Health Nutrition Group, have pointed out that a product can be fortified with enough nutrients to climb toward 4 or 5 stars even while carrying a level of added sugar you wouldn't expect from something wearing that many stars. The rating isn't fake, and it isn't meaningless. It's just measuring more variables than most of us assume it is when we glance at a shelf for 2 seconds. A high score can mean genuinely good, or it can mean cleverly balanced. From the front of the box, you can't tell which. If that shook your trust in the star rating, wait until you see this one. It's basically dessert with a spoon of milk. This entry is less about deception and more about sheer scale. Some cereals simply carry a sugar content that puts them in the same range as confectionery, gram for gram, and there's no clever loophole hiding it. It's just a lot of sugar, sitting plainly on the nutrition panel for anyone who looks. The World Health Organization recommends keeping free sugar intake under 10% of daily energy, with additional benefit below 5%, and Australia's own dietary guidelines echo that same direction. A single generous bowl of one of these cereals can already sit close to that daily ceiling before you've added milk, juice, or anything else to the meal. This one isn't subtle, it's just the plainest example on the list of how much sugar a lot actually is in cereal terms. It's worth sitting with that comparison for a second, because most people picture cereal and confectionery as belonging to completely different categories of food. One's breakfast, one's a treat. Gram for gram, some of these boxes don't actually respect that boundary. The distinction we make in our heads between cereal and dessert is mostly about the time of day we eat it, not about what's actually happening nutritionally once it hits the bowl. Now on's one that markets itself around a single ingredient most people assume is automatically good for them. This is the halo ingredient pattern, a cereal built around oats, specific fruit, or a superfood ingredient printed large on the front of the box. Consumer psychology researchers call this the health halo effect. Once a product is associated with one virtuous ingredient, people tend to assume the whole product is healthier than it actually is, and they stop scrutinizing everything else in the formulation. It's the same mechanism we saw with the star rating in the last entry. One strong, legitimate, positive attribute doing the job of distracting from a less impressive overall recipe. The hero ingredient is real. It's just being asked to carry a lot more credibility than one ingredient reasonably can. This next one has quietly changed its recipe over the years, and almost nobody noticed. Long-running cereals sometimes reformulate their ingredients over time, adjusting sugar, salt, or fiber content gradually rather than all at once. And unless you're the type of person who compares old nutrition panels to current ones, there's no way you'd catch it happening. Consumer groups like Choice have tracked exactly this kind of gradual reformulation across packaged foods in Australia, comparing labels from years apart. The trust you have in a product is often based on the version you first tried, sometimes decades ago, not the version currently on the shelf. And it's not the only cereal on this list that's done this quietly, which is a pattern worth remembering by the time we get to the end. Two more to go, and these are the ones that genuinely surprised me. This one targets adults directly, using language built around weight management, light, diet, or portion-controlled framing. The issue is that a cereal marketed this way doesn't automatically behave differently in your body once it's actually eaten. If the base ingredients are still refined grains with a meaningful amount of added sugar to keep the taste acceptable, the blood sugar response can look a lot like a standard cereal's, a quick rise, followed by the kind of energy dip that leaves you hungry again well before lunch. That dip isn't a willpower failure. It's a fairly well understood physiological pattern tied to how quickly a carbohydrate-heavy, lower-fiber meal is digested. Refined carbohydrate with little fiber or protein alongside it is broken down and absorbed quickly, which pushes blood glucose up fast and prompts a matching insulin response. And the hunger that follows an hour or two later is your body's normal reaction to that swing, not a character flaw. A cereal built around genuine whole grain, fiber, and protein slows that whole process down, which is the actual mechanism behind feeling fuller for longer. Marketing a product at people trying to manage their weight, using language that implies it behaves differently than a regular cereal, when the actual digestion pattern may be similar. That's a genuinely frustrating use of a real health goal. And now, the one I genuinely call the worst on this list. This entry isn't defined by one trick. It's the composite of everything we've already covered. Picture a cereal carrying a front-of-pack claim that's technically true, but incomplete, sitting at a health star rating boosted by fortification rather than restraint, built around a halo ingredient doing more branding work than nutritional work, with a sugar content that lands closer to the confectionery end of the scale than the whole food end. Individually, none of those four things would be damning. Stacked together on a single box, they add up to a product that's doing almost everything we've talked about tonight, all at once, wrapped in packaging that looks, at a glance, like one of the healthiest options in the aisle. That gap between how a product looks and what it actually is the whole theme of this video in one box. So is the entire cereal aisle a write-off? Not even close. Here's what I'd actually put in my own trolley. Let's start with the easiest swap of all. The simplest option is plain, rolled oats, cooked as porridge or soaked overnight. No added sugar, a genuinely short ingredient list, often just one ingredient, and a fiber and protein profile that keeps you fuller for longer than most boxed cereals manage. It's also one of the cheapest items per serve in the entire cereal aisle, and it takes about 5 minutes of effort, or none at all if you prep it the night before. The second option is a genuinely low-sugar whole grain cereal, and the way to identify one isn't the front of the box, it's checking that sugar sits low on the ingredient list, and that the nutrition panel shows a modest sugar figure alongside a solid fiber count. They exist, they're just not the loudest boxes on the shelf. The third option is a homemade muesli, rolled oats, a handful of nuts, seeds, and dried fruit mixed in bulk on a Sunday. It costs a fraction of a branded equivalent per serve, and because you're choosing every ingredient yourself, there's no label to decode in the first place. You already know exactly what's in it. If plain oats feel too bland at first, that's normal. Most of us have spent years eating cereal that's engineered to taste noticeably sweet, so anything without added sugar can feel flat for the first week or two. Cinnamon, a spoon of natural peanut butter, or fresh fruit stirred through does the flavor work without needing refined sugar to get there, and the adjustment period is genuinely short. None of these three options ask you to be perfect or obsessive about food. They're just swaps that hold up to the same scrutiny we've just put 9 other boxes through. Once you see the pattern behind all 9 of these, you won't need a video like this again, because you'll be able to spot it yourself. Here's the pattern, stripped down to one rule. Ingredients on any Australian food label are listed by descending weight, which means whatever's listed first or second makes up the bulk of the product. If a sugar-related ingredient, sugar, glucose syrup, honey, whatever form it takes, sits near the top of that list, no claim on the front of the box changes what that product actually is. Health star ratings, fiber claims, whole grain claims, and hero ingredients can all be true and still sit on top of a product that's mostly sugar by weight. The front of the box is marketing. The ingredient list is the product. This was never about willpower, and it was never about you failing to read closely enough on a rushed weekday morning. It's about a shelf full of products designed quite legally to look better than they are, using rules that reward the right formulation choices rather than genuine restraint. Now you've got a skill instead of just 9 isolated facts. Something you can use on literally anything in the supermarket, not just cereal. The next time you're standing in that aisle deciding between two boxes that both claim to be the healthy option, you don't need a nutritionist on speed dial. You just need to flip the box over, find the ingredient list, and look at what's sitting in the first 2 or 3 positions. That single habit does more for your breakfast than any front-of-pack star or slogan ever will. If you want more breakdowns like this one, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which one of these 9 you had in your pantry this morning. I'd genuinely like to know how many of you are staring at your own kitchen shelf right now.